will be the coordinator of the coalition, Casey Creamer. Casey came to the coalition last year after representing California cotton growers in regulatory and legislative matters since 2005. In that role, he worked closely with Dave and others in reducing the water quality requirements placed on growers and coalitions. In his role with the Kings River Water Quality Coalition, Casey also coordinates the Southern San Joaquin Valley Water Quality Coalition and is an executive committee member on the CV Salts program, which is another program on the heels of this one's coming at you in the near future. Casey will be giving an overview of the key policy activities facing the coalition in this next year. Casey?
Well, good morning, and again, I want to express our apologies for the being a little unprepared with the number of people here today. It's a good turnout, like Dave said, and unexpected, but thank you again for being here, and please, our apologies for that. First thing off, we've been throwing a lot of dates at you. We've been throwing a lot of forms at you. Just so you know, when there is a requirement, a specific requirement for specifically your parcels, you will get a mailing with the instructions along with the forms that you need to do. So again, we want to let you know of all these requirements, but you will get specific notification when each one of these requirements is tasked of you. The nitrogen management plan worksheet that Dan will go over here in a little bit, it's an on-farm requirement this year. We'll be sending those out to everybody, and we'll be letting you know in detail how to fill those out, and we'll be also holding multiple workshops at the local farm bureaus and irrigation districts to help you more regionally fill those forms out and get familiar with them. The farm evaluation, just the first one. The farm evaluation, that's something that we would have been doing today. We would have had to turn that in right now, but that's not something that will have to be turned in until March of next year. And so, but you need to be thinking about that as far as your practices this year, because the practices this year is what's going to be turned in on the farm evaluation of March of next year. What most of you probably really want to know is my land in a high vulnerable area? And I wish I could tell you and give you an answer today, because that's what really triggers the requirement for the nitrogen management plan. It is like Rick and Eric have said before, it is not approved yet. We submitted a plan on November 20th, and we're waiting for the regional board, and we're having negotiations with them. Here is the original map of the Kings River area. This is the regional board's initial map, and they said this area is high vulnerable. It's all the green here, which is pretty much almost our entire coalition area. So during the negotiations, they gave us this and said this is what's going to be the high vulnerability area. We said this information is not accurate. It used a lot of old data, and what they did was they looked at all the water quality data, and they drew a big circle around all the exceedances. We wanted a different approach, and so that's why Dave and others negotiated for the coalitions to be able to develop their own groundwater assessment reports, use better data, more QA/QC data to refine those areas. So this is what we were fighting against in the negotiations of the orders, and this is unfortunately still what we're fighting against today. We submitted a report, looks like this. The yellow and orange squares, the section-based analysis, is what we proposed to the regional board as the high vulnerability area. It looks somewhat similar, but it's confined to a section base. We didn't draw big circles and include everybody just because there was an exceedance at a neighboring area. I can tell you, be honest with you, regional board doesn't like this. They want to see more. If we gave them that, we'd be done today, and they could give us a high vulnerability area. But this is what we're working towards. We're trying to minimize it because the requirements for growers is significantly different of whether you're in a high vulnerability area or a low vulnerability area. And I think it's the board's directions and the staff's direction is to try to minimize the area as much as we possibly can. Dealing with this program, one, it reduces costs for everybody, but most importantly, It reduces the requirements of you, the grower. So we're going to continue fighting that battle to try to keep this as small as we possibly can. Dan's going to talk about the actual worksheet, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy from the summer report. We negotiated this a long time ago. We worked with the regional board and said, of that nitrogen management plan worksheet, growers will report to us field and parcel numbers. But field and parcel numbers would be scrubbed by the coalition. That's just information the coalition would have. We would never tabulate that and send it on to the regional water board. The other categories that we talked about that the regional board wanted us to include was crop, acres, and ratio. And that ratio was the difference between what you plan to apply and basically, or what your plant needed, what your crop needed versus what you actually applied. They're trying to get that as close as 1-to-1 as they possibly can, get you to consider all the inputs that Eric was talking about earlier. Well, the regional board thought about that and they said, well, if we just did it basically what the grower says they think they need and what they actually apply, we'll get a bunch of 1 ratios. And they said, no, you got to actually show the ratio needs to be the difference between what you applied versus what the plant consumed. And that is just information for the number of crops that we grow in the Central Valley is just not available today. So the language was changed. In the order, it was changed from crop need, to consumption. And in the order today, it's still a ratio. We've had, subsequently, after those negotiations, there was the Harder report, which some of you may be familiar with, basically indicated agriculture is 96% of the problem in San Joaquin Valley. There are also local impacts, but ag was to blame for the nitrates in the groundwater. Much of it legacy, but still don't know about today. So we had, from that report, State Water Board recommended 2 panels. One was the CDFA task force, which we had, Dave sat on, there's some of the other coalition that sat on that, and they made recommendations for, of that nitrogen management plan worksheet, what actually would get reported. Then there was a second panel, and that was the State Water Board's expert panel, agricultural expert panel. And we were fortunate to get, we nominated 4 people, and we got 3 of them actually on that expert panel. One was Dan Monk, who's just walking in right now, UC Cooperative Extension. Second one here is President McKean was on that panel as one of the grower members on that panel. And the third that we nominated that got selected was Bob Hutmacher, UC Cooperative Extension, specialist in working in nitrogen for a long time. Those 3 guys, along with the other panelists on that, really brought a lot of very good recommendations to this program. Their charge was to critically evaluate the regional board's way that they are regulating agriculture with regards to nitrogen. Regional board absolutely, both, not just the Central Valley, but the Central Coast and other boards absolutely hated the report, especially the initial draft report. Didn't like it because it was a strong critique of what they were planning to do. Currently, it's in limbo of what happens with that, but they also recommended, the expert panel report said, nitrogen applied. Let's just focus on nitrogen applied. Yes, it doesn't give us everything, doesn't give us what's removed, but let's initially focus on nitrogen applied because nitrogen applied is easy for growers to report, and it's available today, and there's just so much uncertainty with the removal. That was in the draft report. Through pressure, another rationale is said, okay, well, at some point, we're going to need to add in nitrogen removed as well. But the science isn't available yet today, so it's going to take several years. That's the expert panel report. The state board is currently evaluating both the CDFA expert panel report, or CDFA task force report, and the expert panel report, and trying to figure out what components of those reports or recommendations they are going to tell the regional boards to incorporate into their programs. We hope they take a lot of the very good recommendations from both of those panels, but there's also environmental justice and other groups that are actually wanting even more data to be reported from your nitrogen management plan than what we're willing to give up. There'll be 2 processes that we'll have to watch very closely this year. One is at the regional board level, we're forming a nitrogen advisory work group, technical work group, to evaluate what information, what science is there for reporting of in removed from these nitrogen management plans. And then what hurdles are in front of us for getting that data, and what's the timelines for when we could actually practically incorporate in removal into those nitrogen management plan summary reports. The second one is going to be at the state board level. As these WDRs that were being adopted, there was lawsuits or petitions on both sides. The Agriculture Coalition's petition to the State Water Board on the orders that they were too onerous. The environmental and other activists said that they were not onerous enough and that they needed to be much more like the individual programs that the water boards have traditionally implemented. So there's several petitions sitting in front of the State Water Resources Control Board right now, and they're evaluating when they're going to take those up, how they're going to take those up, and how they're going to modify the regional board's orders. They could come out with a directive that says most of the things in the nitrogen management plan worksheet could get reported. They could come up with that. Or they could keep with the just in applied crop and acres and say the other stuff might get incorporated down the road. So this is an important policy effort that we're going to be focused on this year to try to minimize the information that we're supposed to collect and report, keep as much information of your individual, personal, confidential, proprietary information on farm as we possibly can. So just wanted to let you know that. Eric talked a little bit about the deadlines in the Tulare Lake Basin. There's 8 of us or 9 of us in the Tulare Lake Basin order, different coalitions. We all had requirements for farm evaluations to turn in this year in March from high vulnerability areas. And we also had requirements for a nitrogen summary report from this crop year to report it the next year. Regional board knew that the GAR timelines didn't quite work out and that high vulnerability areas wouldn't be set in stone by the time these requirements were in place. So they asked us to comment on just the farm evaluation plan only and the timelines. They told us, we'll only give you a couple months extension. We'll give you 3 months at the most, maybe August at the time frame. So you would have to do a farm evaluation in August and then again in March the following year. We told them that wasn't acceptable and that we wanted more than that. Farm evaluation, there's no point in reporting it in August, September, and then turning right back around and doing another effort with the same information the following year. They told us no. They gave us an alternative. They said, well, instead of high and low vulnerability, why don't you give us all large farms, 60, and large farm is 60 acres or more. You give us all large farms farm evaluations March of this year. We said no. And we kept pressing for other relief in the nitrogen management plan reporting as well. We subsequently set up meetings with board members to educate them on what we were asking. And we had a phone call with the executive officer. And after all that, the executive officer agreed with us. And the board eventually adopted the proposed changes as we proposed. Those changes only affected the Tulare Lake Basin and Westlands. Those are the only coalition areas that got those changes. Up north of us, they have already started turning in farm evaluations. They'll already be doing them this year. And they'll be reporting nitrogen management plan summary reports in March of next year. So a little bit different timelines for everybody south of the San Joaquin River than what's happening to the north of us. Want to touch just briefly on the Southern San Joaquin Valley Water Quality Coalition a little bit. Dave talked about it previously. That group was in place that was formally managing this whole order for you on the surface water program. It has been separated. There's been more local, because of the grower impacts, more requirements from you. We do have a little bit smaller coalitions working more regionally with you. But I just want to let you know that even though that organization is not the implementing organization, we still meet with all those other groups in the southern half of the valley and coordinate, discuss implementation issues, work together, see where we can save costs, and reduce the differences between our coalitions as much as we possibly can. Because we know many of you don't just have land in the Kings River area, you might have land in Cahuilla or Tule or even Kern. So we want to make sure that we're communicating as much as possible to reduce the duplication of efforts between us. So just know we're working together on that, and as we work together on some other agreements that I'll talk about here in a second. The NPEP, this won't affect you here in the next couple of years, but this program has the potential to be the single most impactful thing to your operations from this program. Like Dave talked about earlier, currently this is a data management, data collection effort, but we have to get to a point where we have to start evaluating the practices that you have in place currently today and determining what the impact of groundwater quality is from that. This is actually something we negotiated and was very difficult to negotiate into the WDRs. Regional board typical way that they do this type of monitoring is if you're a food processor that has a WDR, they look at your groundwater flow, they look where you're discharging, they make you drill a representative monitoring well upstream and downstream and measure the difference and do a bunch of water quality samples. And they wanted us to do that across the entire central San Joaquin Valley. Well, with depths of groundwater at many, many feet in many areas, the results from those would be many, many years before it would actually happen. We said, that's a big waste of money to be drilling a bunch of representative groundwater monitoring wells all over the place. It tells us nothing, and we're spending a bunch of money, growers' money, for no purpose. We said, let's focus on what we can control. Let's look at the surface of what the practices that we've done, that we currently have in place. Because a lot of the readings that they're getting today in those groundwater monitoring wells are old. So we didn't want to be proven guilty because of old data. So we said, let's focus on the field level. So we're going to be implementing a program. We have this is one of those programs that there's still a lot of gray area. We're going to try to incorporate as much of the research that's already ongoing with UC, CDFA, commodity groups, so we don't duplicate efforts wherever we can. If you're spending money in one area, we want to be able to utilize it and not go spend money again for another effort. So this program we have formed with the other groups in the southern San Joaquin Valley. It's Kings, Cahuilla, Tule, Kern, and the Coelho Water District have all formed an MPEP group agreement because they gave us two options. They said, you can all individually do this program, or you can join together with some of the other coalitions and do it more cost effectively together. So we're doing it that route. We're doing it the group route. It's going to be difficult working. There's different characteristics in all the different regions, but we've got to come together for the best interest of the growers to try to minimize your costs. So we've submitted that application for the group agreement to the regional board. Once they approve that group application, we'll have 2 years to develop a work plan. And that work plan is going to be a difficult and long process to sell that to the regional board to get them to buy off on this program versus the extensive representative groundwater monitoring wells. But here's where this affects you. Is that at the end of this study, we have 2 years for work plan. After the work plan, we have 6-year reporting time frames, 6 years of research, and we can do a phase schedule. So we start with the priority crops and then the high vulnerability areas and work our way down. So this will be a long process. We're hoping that the results of the studies will say, you've already done what you needed to do. Ag has evolved their management practices over the years. This is a legacy issue. Our current contributions are protective of water quality, and we can move on. But where if the data from these studies shows that we still need to do additional things, it's not, current practices are not protective, then we'll have to go back and look with work with the commodities and the research organizations and say, what can we do just slightly different so that we can protect water quality? So, at that point is when, at some point, the regional board can't tell you, you can't farm this way, but they can tell you, or they can't tell you how to farm, but they can tell you the way you currently farm is not protected and you can't do it. So we're going to do everything we can to where we don't get to that point. We'll be working with a lot of the local commodity groups and UC Cooperative Extension, NRCS, to try to bring a lot more funding to the area. We've done a lot of this in air quality, where we stayed ahead of the regulatory burdens being placed on you by getting a bunch of money, federal money, state money, put in place to try to improve practices before regulatory mandate. But we'll be reporting on this for several years to come, and so just note that this is going to be potentially the most impactful to your operations, but it won't have any impact on you for the next several years. Another effort that we're heavily involved with, Mark mentioned, is the CV salts, and that stands for Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability. The original goal of that group was to figure out a long-term way to remove salts out of this valley, because if we just keep accumulating salts, ag will not be sustainable. Well, when the nitrate issue became more elevated politically, they added nitrates to this as well. So they're also working on the regional board, the staff of the regional board, they're under a strict legislation that tells them what they have to do. And they've had litigation and judges tell them they have to do more than what they're currently doing. So they recognize that their current regulatory structure was never developed with agriculture, irrigated agriculture, a bunch of dispersed non-point sources in mind. It was all geared towards individual food processing, cities and counties, those type of discharges. So the regulatory structure that they currently have, they realize doesn't work for agriculture. So they formed this group. They're doing their best to try, within the law that they currently have, is adjust their current regulatory structure to be able to solve some of the drinking water issues which are causing the political leverage that's not in ag's favor, but also keep agriculture in business at the same time. And currently, the way the regulations and the law are currently drafted, they can only give us more time. They really can't change anything to really substantially keep ag sustainable down the road. So this is going to be it is a huge program. There's been a lot of money invested in it, but this is our opportunity. Not many chances does agriculture and other discharger stakeholders get the opportunity to say, the current regulatory structure doesn't work, this is how we want to do it differently. And that's this process, and I'll be updating you for several more years on this process. Just want to kind of wrap with giving you kind of a summary of things that we'll be working on. Again, a lot of these program requirements are still not firm for you, and I apologize for that. But we'll be working harder over the next year to try to provide more certainty, but not give in too easily to where that certainty is not something that we don't want for the rest of you or brings additional burdens to you. There's a grower certification program. Dan may talk about this a little bit. Dan's been leading this charge with regards to CCAs. But in the original order, they said everybody has to have a certified nitrogen management plan, and you have to go out and hire a CCA or another professional. It couldn't be your own agronomist that could fill out that plan. We said that's absolutely ridiculous. Who knows the growers' land more than the grower themselves? Growers should absolutely be able to sign these nitrogen management plans or certify them themselves. Took a lot of negotiation, but we were able to achieve it. What they said, though, we're not just going to allow anybody to certify. We need to know there's some basis of education there that a grower understands how to plan for nitrogen. So CDFA, coalitions are working together to try to come up with a grower self-certification program. We're trying to get CDFA to buy off on a program we're pushing. It's very simple. It's kind of a train-the-trainer half day with some continuing education alongside. So give the growers that option. If you want to self-certify your plan, you can go to that training. If you already work with a professional, if you have an agronomist on staff, they can already do it for you. So it's another key area we're going to be trying to put in place to make this simpler for you. The MPEP implementation, again, we'll be working with all the coalitions over the next year and working with the Regional Water Board to get them their buy-off on an approach with that program. And probably the biggest thing that we'll be working on is, like I talked before, the petitions before the state board. That really has the potential to make our program harder on you, not easier on you. Some of the actions that they've already taken with regards to the Central Coast, they said that every individual grower well needs to be monitored and reported. So there's a lot of things in there. We absolutely don't want it to infect our program over here, so we'll be working hard to keep those things out of it. But even with the petition process, that's not the final step. Once the state board weighs in on the petitions, there's a likelihood that one side or the other will file litigation. And from that litigation, typically, a judge then decides. And with the dairy program and some of the other orders that have come before us, before the irrigated lands orders, they have not been in our favor. The judge up in Sacramento, typically, when you have disadvantaged community drinking water concerns versus what they perceive as big agriculture, typically doesn't go in our favor. So this is going to be a long process, and we're going to be doing everything we can in all these areas to reduce the requirements on you. And I just want to give you a brief, kind of what this coalition stands for and what we're going to be doing on your behalf. But I first want to let you know that this program is just starting. Typically, we had a surface water program. Those requirements were already encompassed in what we were doing. But a lot of these new requirements, the farm evaluation, the efforts that we have to do to tabulate and report that, the nitrogen management plan, all the groundwater monitoring that we're tasked to do, the MPEP program, these are all things that have not started yet. We've started the plans, we're starting negotiation, it will be implemented in the future. So you can expect, there's going to be more requirements in the future. And it's going to take, previously in the surface water program, you could join the coalition, and we did the regional monitoring, and that was pretty much the impact that it had on the grower community in our region. Now with the groundwater component, it's going to take a lot more individual grower efforts to maintain compliance with this program, unfortunately. One of those is going to be education and outreach, and again, I apologize for not having enough room for everybody today, but this is something we are going to commit to do multiple times. This isn't your only opportunity. We're going to be working with the commodities and farm bureaus to get out to you wherever you are in the most convenient way possible, but it'll also take effort from you to be involved, to know what's going on, to comply with the forms, comply with the requirements, and also we need to hear from you. We don't want to make it just a one-sided, here's the order, here's what you need to do. We need to hear back from you and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Why don't you try doing it this way, or give us suggestions. So we want to maintain that mutual dialogue with you, and that only happens through continued education, outreach, and communication between us and you. The other thing I'm going to commit to you is that we will continue to work with all of your representatives on the farm bureaus, commodity groups. We know that this is a critical issue. This potentially down the road has the ability to affect the way you farm. This is an expensive program for you, and we are doing our very best to make sure that the local farm bureaus and commodity groups are involved in our processes. We have meetings where we bring them in, give them status updates on what we're doing. There's times where we need them to provide a little bit of muscle on the regional board and legislature. We work closely with them to do that as well. So I just want to commit to you that we're going to continue to develop, maintain, and develop further that close working relationship with the people who are paid to represent you on these issues as well. And then I also want to tell you that the Kings Coalition is going to make every effort, and has been over the years, a leader in this area. We don't just sit back and let the regulations come on our desk and say, okay, we'll implement them. We work our darnedest to lead on the issues, to change the requirements placed on you, to make this simple, to make it more streamlined, to reduce the requirements and the costs on you. And I'll guarantee you in the future that the Kings will continue to take that active role in leading on these issues. So again, I just want to say thank you for coming. Apologize that we didn't have the space, and we'll be available for questions and answers following Dan and Chris's presentation. So thank you very much.